9 days.
Western Australian Liberal Senator Dean Smith says he's highly cautious about changing the Constitution to recognise Indigenous Australians. Senator Smith says the Constitution is not the ideal place for symbolic statements. The issue will be debated at the WA Liberal Party State Conference later this month, with some members pushing against the proposal. Senator Smith is speaking here with our National Affairs correspondent Greg Jennett.
Well, Dean Smith, congratulations. It appears you're going to be returned from the July election as a WA Senator, and WA Liberals will soon be debating and may pass motions calling on you and others to oppose any changes to the Constitution when they come to Indigenous Australians. Do you look forward to doing that if that motion's passed?
Well, when the Liberals gather at their annual state conference in 2 weekends' time, Greg, the issue of constitutional recognition will most definitely be on the table. It's not the first time that WA Liberals have debated this particular issue, and I might say that constitutional conservatism is very much the DNA of the West Australian Liberal Party. But what we do know is constitutional recognition of Indigenous people has been advocated by John Howard, has been advocated by Tony Abbott. If we are to have a referendum, then it's important that divisions of the Liberal Party, not just in Western Australia, but across the country, debate the merits of that and, importantly, whatever they might decide, encourage their parliamentary representatives to reflect the wishes of local Liberals.
And do those concerns, do they match with your own concerns when you look at what I think you previously expressed as concerns about constitutional change?
I am highly cautious about the merits of constitutional recognition of Indigenous people in our Constitution. In its essence, I argue that the Australian Constitution is a guidebook, if you like. It sets out the way that our parliamentary processes function. It's not, I don't believe, the ideal place for symbolic statements like the one that's being proposed for Indigenous recognition.
But from that symbolism, don't we then get to practical improvements potentially?
Well, this is the critical issue. I don't think that any Australian disagrees with the argument that we would like to see improvements in regards to Indigenous health, Indigenous education, Indigenous employment opportunities. Where Australians will differ is constitutional recognition of Indigenous people, the pathway to achieving that. And I'd argue that it's not.
All right. Well, I noticed that your former state leader there, Bill Hassel, said that if we change the Constitution, they, Indigenous Australians, will want a special constitutional position in the Parliament and favouritism in terms of their entitlements. Now, do you think that runs the risk of fanning division, or do you even agree with him?
Well, the first point I'd make is that Bill Hassel is a former state parliamentary leader, widely respected in Liberal circles, a man with very, very considered views on these issues. How I've interpreted Bill's comments, what Bill is saying is that the issue of recognition is so broad, and it's important to note that the government is yet to land on a form of words or a very, very clear proposal about what recognition would look like. But we know that over the last few years, a variety of issues have actually been canvassed as a way of giving meaning to that recognition. Indigenous advisory boards, parliamentary representatives having seats in the Parliament, indeed preambular statements in our Constitution. So I'd argue that the debate is still ongoing, still has a very, very long way to go, even though we have had a bipartisan parliamentary report on the matter.
I know this isn't a big point, but just on the parliamentary representation, I know it's just one possible thing that flows from all of this, but what's your attitude to that?
I think I would be strongly opposed to designated seats for Indigenous people, or people of any race for that matter, in our national parliament.
All right. Now, how would you explain this to Ken Wyatt, another colleague from the West, who says when it starts to say that the WA federal members of the Liberal Party should prosecute a no case, then that's wrong? Ken Wyatt's words.
Well, a foundational principle of the modern Liberal Party is that members of Parliament are afforded their own conscience on a whole variety of matters. And of course, Mr Wyatt brings to his parliamentary practice some very, very unique experiences and unique perspectives. I'm sure that Ken will be encouraged to consider the view of the state conference, whatever that might be, but no one will be seeking to bind Ken to a particular course of action, not at all.
And is that widely recognised, that this is a subject on which Liberals may freely choose to exercise their conscience?
Oh, well, I think that every issue in the Parliamentary Liberal Party is one that members of Parliament can exercise conscience on. It's a foundational principle of our party and, in most cases, has been one that's been upheld and respected, and I don't expect that to be any different with regards to this issue.
OK, so even if this gets up as a referendum question next year or whenever it comes up, other things flow from it. One is the idea that a treaty may come about after that hurdle is crossed, if in fact it is. What's your attitude to that one?
Well, if I could give Mr Shorten some advice, if constitutional recognition is to be successful, any proposition must be minimal, because that is the best way to encourage broad consensus and support for constitutional reform. We know the statistics. 44 constitutional referendums have been held in this country and only 6 have been successful. Even with bipartisan support, constitutional reform proposals are not guaranteed of success. I'd argue that if we are to have Indigenous recognition, then a minimal proposition is one that is likely to get or garner popular support.
And is that one that you could support? If that minimalist model were put forward, you think you'd be OK with that?
I would have to see the detail of any proposition that was put forward before I would commit to it. Central to all of these debates about constitutional reform is the big question of what are the unintended consequences, what are the legal implications that might arise from Indigenous recognition. In the same way, we had a very, very similar debate about the legal implications or the unintended consequences that would arise when we went through a similar debate in regards to recognising local government in the Constitution only a few years ago. The big question always is what are the legal implications and what are the unintended consequences.
All right, and because of the very stats that you've already cited in this interview, that is the difficulty of getting referenda passed in Australia, what's your hunch right now? It doesn't sound, as we run through these arguments, that strict bipartisanship is likely to occur around this, and it seems to be essential.
Well, sometimes I think people put unrealistic timetables to the issue of constitutional reform. If constitutional reform is to be successful, then the merits of that reform proposition need to be well understood by the electorate. There is no need to rush. There is no need to rush. And I'd argue that the likelihood of success means that these ideas must be given time to percolate in the minds of ordinary Australians. So again, a minimal proposition. Well, it could possibly be years. But as the Joint Parliamentary Committee report made very, very clear, a proposition should only be put to the electorate when it is likely to succeed, But until we have a form set of words before us, it is hard to speculate on what that time frame might look like, indeed what support might actually look like.
All right, well, no doubt we will talk further on this, but Senator Dean Smith, we'll leave it there for now. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Greg. Thank you.